Before dawn, the palace looks peaceful. That is the illusion it had perfected over centuries. Stone walls hold their breath. Corridors glow softly under controlled light. Portraits of kings and queens watch in silence. Their painted eyes train forward, never downward. From the outside, nothing is wrong. From the inside, something is missing. A single guard walks his route, a route memorized down to the echo of each step. Routine is comfort here. Routine is protection. But on this morning, routine hesitates. A silver tray rests untouched outside a private door. Still warm, still sealed, still waiting. Silence stretches longer than it should. Inside this palace, silence is never empty. It is curated, managed, assigned. And when silence lingers where a child should be heard, it becomes something else entirely. The guard does not panic. He does not rush. He observes, because duty demands restraint even when instinct whispers danger. Patterns matter more than moments. And this pattern is wrong. Behind polished doors and flawless protocol, a truth is beginning to surface. Not with noise, not with scandal, but with absence. And in a place built to protect its own, absence can be the loudest warning of all. The palace was silent in a way that felt deliberate, not the gentle quiet of early morning, but a controlled stillness, the kind shaped by centuries of power learning how to hide its breathing. Before dawn, Kensington Palace existed between moments. Lights glowed faintly behind tall windows. Corridors waited. The city beyond the gates had not yet stirred. Inside, duty was already awake. A lone guard moved through the eastern wing. His footsteps measured, absorbed by thick carpet and old stone. He had walked this route countless times. Every corner, every shadow, every sound belonged to a pattern he trusted. Routine was not repetition here. It was discipline. It was how order survived history. But this morning, the pattern hesitated. Outside a private doorway, a silver tray rested on a narrow table. Covered, untouched, still warm. The guard slowed, then stopped. The tray should have been removed hours earlier. He knew this without checking. The schedule was fixed. Child protection protocol left no room for uncertainty. Meals were logged, timed, verified. Deviations were rare and documented immediately. He glanced down the corridor. No staff in sight. No movement. Just the low hum of the building itself. The silence pressed closer. He checked his watch. The time aligned. Nothing was late, except the truth. The guard crouched slightly, not touching the tray, only observing. The cover had not shifted. No fingerprints marked the polished surface. It had not even been acknowledged. He straightened slowly. One missed meal could be oversight. Two could be coincidence. But patterns were the language of security. And this wing had been forming one. He continued down the corridor to the service terminal, his posture unchanged, his expression carefully neutral. The screen illuminated his face as he entered his clearance code and accessed the internal logs. His eyes scanned the entries. Meal delivered. Meal returned early. Child resting. Repeated. Always the same phrasing. Always approved by the same names. The guard felt something tighten in his chest. Not panic, not fear, but recognition. This was not disorder. This was consistency. And consistency could be more dangerous than chaos. He resumed his patrol, slower now, attuned to absence as much as presence. Near the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. It should not have been. That door was governed by protocol older than most of the staff who enforced it. Closed. Always closed. Privacy framed as protection. The guard stopped. He did not reach for the handle. He leaned just enough to look inside. The room was dim. Curtains drawn tight. No overhead lights. The air felt still and used. At first, he saw only shadow. Then movement. A small figure sat upright on the bed, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her posture was rigid, not with fear, but with habit. Hair unbrushed. Shoulders narrow. Too narrow. Princess Charlotte looked toward the doorway. She did not flinch. She did not call out. She simply watched. The guard froze, his training holding him perfectly still. He did not enter. He did not step closer. He remained where he was. At the threshold, the invisible line between duty and intrusion. Their eyes met. Her gaze was calm, almost attached. The kind of calm that does not belong to children. Children ask questions. Children demand comfort. Charlotte did neither. The guard noticed the room now. Truly noticed it. No toys within reach. No books on the bedside table. No glass of water. The space was orderly, immaculate, and hollow. He cleared his throat softly. "Your Royal Highness," he said, quietly, formally. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was low, controlled, as if she had learned not to waste sound. He did not ask how she was. He did not ask why she was awake. Protocol allowed only one question. "Is someone with you?" She shook her head once. That was all. The guard inclined his head and stepped back, closing the door carefully, not sealing it shut, but restoring its position. Appearances mattered. Even now, he stood in the corridor again, his pulse steady, his expression composed. But something irreversible had occurred. This was no longer observation. This was responsibility. He walked directly to the administrative wing and sat at the terminal reserved for incident reporting. His fingers hovered briefly above the keys. Reports like this altered careers, sometimes lives. He began to type. Time-stamped observations. Repeated discrepancies. Environmental details. No emotion. No assumption. At the end, he added one final line. Child appeared withdrawn, unattended, and inconsistent with safeguarding expectations. He marked it urgent. The system accepted the report without sound. Elsewhere in the palace, lights began to turn on. Staff arrived. Morning routines resumed. The illusion of normality reassembled itself with precision, but the silence had already spoken. The report moved upward through internal channels. Quietly, efficiently, without resistance. A message wrapped in restraint. When Prince William received it, he read it twice. He said nothing. And in that silence, the palace began to change. The palace did not react. That was the first sign. By mid-morning, Kensington Palace was fully awake. Staff moved through corridors with practiced efficiency. Doors opened and closed. Schedules advanced. Meetings began. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, something had shifted, but only for those trained to sense it. Prince William stood at the window of his private study, London stretching out below him. The report rested on the desk behind him, unread now, but not forgotten. He had not summoned advisors. He had not raised questions aloud. Instead, he invoked a mechanism rarely used, one designed precisely for moments like this. Safeguarding review. Internal. Quiet. The language was neutral. The authority absolute. By early afternoon, the palace's administrative machinery began to turn, slowly, deliberately, not with urgency, but with formality. Requests were issued under the guise of routine oversight. Logs were asked for. Schedules reviewed. Access rosters compiled. No one was accused. No one was warned. That was the danger. Behind office doors and inside private workspaces, senior aides complied with polished professionalism. Documents were delivered. Files opened. Explanations prepared in advance. Rehearsed not for truth, but for continuity. Meal schedules showed compliance. Care rotations appeared complete. Signatures aligned. On paper, nothing was wrong. But paper had always been loyal to those who controlled it. As the review deepened, subtle fractures emerged. Timestamps that did not match. Logs approved without verification. Security footage marked unavailable during routine intervals. Each discrepancy was minor, defensible, alone meaningless. Together, they formed something else. A system not failing, but cooperating. Prince William reviewed the findings in silence. The language of protocol revealed itself not as protection, but as insulation. Every responsibility had been distributed thinly enough to disappear. When questioned, senior household staff responded with calm confidence. Tradition was cited. Hierarchy explained. Privacy emphasized. Always in the language of service. Safeguarding statutes, designed to protect the vulnerable, were invoked to limit access, restrict oversight, and discourage inquiry. Concern was reframed as intrusion. Vigilance recast as overreach. The palace became a maze of etiquette, where every corridor led back to permission. Then, late in the review, a file surfaced, sealed, archived, untouched for years. It contained prior concerns, vague, diluted, quietly dismissed. Reports that followed the same path, met the same language, and vanished into procedure. Prince William closed the file slowly. This was not neglect. This was design. And somewhere within the palace, those who had relied on silence began to sense that it was no longer protecting them. The palace summoned the guard without explanation. The notice arrived through formal channels, phrased with immaculate neutrality. No accusation, no urgency, just a request, precise in time, exact in location. The kind of request that carried weight, because it pretended not to. He arrived early. The room chosen for the meeting was small, windowless, and deliberately unremarkable. A place designed to leave no memory behind it. 2 chairs, 1 table, a recorder resting face down, its presence unacknowledged. Senior household officials entered one by one. They did not introduce themselves. They did not need to. Rank was evident in posture alone. Years of proximity to power had shaped their movements, calm, assured, unhurried. The door closed. Silence followed. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of expectation. The guard stood until instructed to sit. They began gently. His service record was acknowledged, commended, his discipline praised in language so polished it felt rehearsed. Loyalty was emphasized, not as virtue, but as requirement. Then the tone shifted. The report was mentioned, not directly, obliquely. Concerns were raised about interpretation, about context, about the danger of mistaking routine royal privacy for irregularity. The words were careful, chosen to sound reasonable, almost protective. They reminded him of protocol, how proximity did not equate to authority, how observation did not equal understanding, how discretion preserved the institution. One official leaned forward slightly. Mistakes, he said, happen when individuals exceeded their remit. Careers, he added, were built on knowing where that remit ended. The implications settled into the room. Recant quietly, reframe subtly, allow the system to correct itself. The guard listened without interruption. When invited to respond, he did not argue. He reached into his folder. Slowly, deliberately, he placed documents on the table. Logs copied directly from the system, time-stamped and verified. He pointed to discrepancies not as accusations, but as facts. He highlighted gaps in surveillance records that aligned too precisely to be coincidental. The officials watched, their expressions unchanged. Then he produced something else. A small folded paper, handled carefully, protected, a note, handwritten. The letters were uneven, childlike, controlled. It had been slipped to him earlier that morning during a routine check, passed without eye contact, without explanation. A transfer executed with quiet urgency. The guard unfolded it and read aloud. I get tired waiting. Sometimes no one comes. The room changed, not outwardly, not visibly, but something brittle cracked beneath the surface. No one spoke immediately. The note was not evidence in the formal sense. It carried no seal, no authorization, but it carried weight the palace could not document away. The officials shifted now. Tone hardened. The guard was warned about boundaries, about the danger of involving himself emotionally, about the seriousness of placing personal interpretation above institutional judgment. He did not respond, because at that moment, the door opened. Prince William entered without announcement. The room stood instinctively. He did not acknowledge the formalities. He looked only at the table, at the documents, the note, the quiet defiance of facts laid bare. He picked up the paper. Read it once, then again. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He asked a single question. Who signed off on this? No one answered immediately. Eyes lowered, hands folded. That silence, that hesitation, was the answer. William straightened slowly. He spoke with controlled precision, each word measured. Loyalty, he said, was not obedience to rank. Duty, he said, was not silence in the face of harm. And protocol, when used to conceal rather than protect, ceased to be legitimate. He looked at the officials now. This review is no longer internal discretion, he said. It is moral necessity. He turned to the guard. You did exactly what you were trained to do. The guard stood motionless, his expression unchanged, but something in his posture released. William faced the room once more. Effective immediately, he said. All safeguarding authority within this household is suspended pending full review. The words landed with finality. Careers paused. Power froze. No argument followed, because the decision had already been made. The palace felt smaller after the order was given, not physically. The corridor still stretched long and polished. The ceiling still rose with ceremonial grandeur, but structurally, as if the walls themselves had drawn inward, aware that something fundamental had just shifted. Prince William remained standing long after the room had emptied. The chair behind him went unused. The documents lay where they had been left. The handwritten note rested atop the stack, light, fragile, and impossibly heavy. He did not touch it again. He did not need to. The decision was already moving. Royal prerogative, when invoked, did not announce itself loudly. It traveled through sealed channels, marked with authority so absolute it required no justification. By late afternoon, dismissal orders were being drafted, not selectively, not symbolically, but comprehensively. Entire senior household authority. Suspended. Effective immediately. The wording was precise. Cold. Unemotional. No names highlighted. No accusations stated. Just removal. When the first notification reached a senior aide, disbelief flickered briefly across a face trained never to reveal uncertainty. The reaction was contained. Questions framed politely. Objections implied rather than spoken. Those questions went unanswered, because this was not a discussion. Across the palace, devices vibrated quietly. Doors closed more carefully than usual. Conversations shortened. Power, long assumed permanent, discovered how quickly it could evaporate. Some protested internally, citing decades of service. Others retreated into silence, calculating survival. A few understood immediately what this meant, and why it could not be stopped. Private offices were emptied under supervision. Access cards deactivated. Authority dissolved not with spectacle, but with procedure. The palace had learned long ago how to dismantle itself politely. In one office, a drawer was left open. Inside, documents surfaced. Correspondence layered with euphemism and deferral. Emails that spoke of sensitivity. Memos that advised patience. Reports reduced to administrative inconvenience. Each page revealed the same pattern. Responsibility moved sideways. Warning softened. Action delayed. No single villain. No dramatic conspiracy. Just a culture trained to prioritize continuity over conscience. As the removals continued, Princess Charlotte was relocated. Quietly. No announcement. No ceremony. She was escorted through a service corridor she had never been allowed to use before. The light there was brighter. The walls plainer. The air less heavy. She did not ask questions, but she noticed the difference. A new room. Different voices. A presence that did not leave. Care arrived not as apology, but as consistency. Back in the main wing, the final dismissal was executed just before evening. The last senior staff member paused briefly at the threshold. Not to protest, not to plead, but to look back at the palace that had once amplified their authority. It did not look back. The door closed. Prince William stood alone in the central corridor as the echoes faded. For the first time since morning, he exhaled fully. The cost was already clear. This decision would never be invisible. It would ripple outward, through tradition, through expectation, through the fragile balance that kept the monarchy untouched by its own machinery. He had not just removed staff. He had broken a pattern. And patterns, once broken, demand replacement. Night fell over Kensington Palace. Lights dimmed. Silence returned, different now. Honest. Unmanaged. William remained still, facing the long corridor ahead of him, aware that what he'd done could not be undone. The palace would endure. But it would not forget. Morning returned to the palace without ceremony. There were no announcements. No statements drafted for public consumption. No visible sign that the institution had been reshaped overnight. From the outside, Kensington Palace remained what it had always been: composed, controlled, enduring. Inside, everything moved differently. The absence of senior household authority created a space that protocol alone could not fill. Into that space stepped clarity. Temporary oversight was assigned with deliberate restraint. External safeguarding advisors were introduced quietly, their presence framed not as intervention but as reinforcement. Trusted protectors, selected not for rank but for record, were reassigned under direct royal supervision. Every change was documented. Every responsibility was clear. There would be no ambiguity this time. Princess Charlotte's days began to settle into rhythm. Not spectacle, not indulgence. Consistency. Morning light reached the room fully now. Curtains drawn back at the same hour each day. Meals arrived warm and stayed until finished. Water was always within reach. Voices remained, not hovering, not intrusive, but present. Care became visible through repetition. William visited without announcement, not as inspection, not as reassurance, as presence. He did not speak in prepared language. He did not explain the palace to her or promise things beyond his control. He sat. He listened. He allowed silence to exist without authority attached to it. Trust, he understood, was not restored by declaration. It was earned through return. Elsewhere in the palace, the institution absorbed what had happened. Departments adjusted. Protocols were rewritten not publicly, but precisely. Safeguarding statutes were amended to remove interpretive loopholes. Oversight mechanisms were embedded where discretion had once ruled. Silence would no longer be enough. William addressed the household privately, not in a hall, not at a podium, in smaller rooms, where language could not hide behind ceremony. He spoke of duty, not as obedience to hierarchy, but as responsibility to those without voice. He spoke of loyalty, not to position, but to principle. He made it clear that service to the crown did not supersede service to conscience. No one interrupted, because this was not a speech. It was a recalibration. Charlotte began to change, subtly, gradually, not through visible transformation, but through release. Her posture softened. Her sleep deepened. Questions returned. Small ones at first. Safe ones. The kind children ask when they believe answers will come. The palace noticed, not as observation, but as confirmation. Care had not been delayed too long to matter. Justice followed without spectacle. Those removed were not paraded. Their actions were addressed through internal consequence, not public condemnation. The monarchy preserved its external silence, but internally, accountability took root. This was not concealment. It was containment, chosen carefully, ethically. William stood one evening in the same corridor where the silence had first been noticed. The air felt different now, lighter, not because the past had vanished, but because it had been confronted. The crown, he understood, was not defined by what it could protect from scrutiny. It was defined by what it chose to protect instead. The palace breathed differently now, not in the grand gestures of ceremony, not in the public-facing precision of guards and curtsies, but in the quiet of small, deliberate routines. Light filtered through windows at precise angles. Corridors, once heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, carried only the soft echo of footsteps measured and purposeful. Silence, once oppressive, had been reclaimed as presence. Princess Charlotte moved through her days with new rhythm, small, steady, unremarkable to any observer unaware of the past. Meals were eaten without pressure, books were placed within reach, and voices remained constant, not loud, not commanding, but attentive. Each detail reinforced safety, consistency, and care. It was a restoration that required no spectacle, no applause, no headlines. In the offices above, protocols were rewritten with precision, guided by the lessons of oversight. Archival files were no longer buried. Logs were cross-checked. Access rosters became living tools of accountability. Every safeguard implemented was quiet but absolute, built to prevent silence from ever concealing neglect again. The guard returned to his routine, unnamed, uncelebrated, yet essential. Each step along the corridors reaffirmed what had changed. His vigilance was no longer just about procedure. It was about conscience and action, about bearing witness without compromise. Prince William walked the palace alone, reflecting not on the upheaval, but on what it revealed. Power was not inherently protective. Tradition was not inherently righteous. Authority could be used to shield wrongdoing or to uphold justice. What mattered was choice, the deliberate, often uncomfortable decision to act ethically when convenience, comfort, and hierarchy all urge restraint. In quiet rooms and empty corridors, the palace learned a truth that no protocol could enforce. The greatest threats to royalty were not external enemies, not scandal, not rebellion, but complacency cultivated by decades of silence. And the smallest acts, a log carefully written, a note noticed, a presence offered without fanfare, could alter the course of centuries. Through restored order and careful attention, the child was safe. Through vigilance and courage, the institution endured. The monarchy survived not because of its age, its wealth, or its ceremony, but because, for one moment, it chose conscience over comfort. And in that choice, a lesson remained for all who walked the halls afterward. Silence can protect, but it can also deceive. Listening, witnessing, and acting, even when invisible, are the true markers of responsibility. The palace had regained its rhythm, but not its innocence. Kensington remained polished, organized, serene in appearance, a fortress of history and ceremony. Yet the corridors now held a different kind of echo. The faint trace of what had been overlooked, the imprint of routines that once concealed more than they protected. Every step of the guards, every shift in staff, every scheduled check carried the weight of lessons learned, and lessons almost ignored. Prince William convened quietly with the remaining household leadership, not for reprimand, not for ritual, for reflection. Protocols were reviewed again methodically. Every statute, every safeguard, every clause meant to prevent harm was dissected for weakness. Where gaps existed, they were reinforced. Where discretion had been abused, clarity replaced it. Logs from previous years were examined. Old reports surfaced, some incomplete, some redacted, many disregarded at the time. Each one told the same story. The palace's machinery could protect or it could obscure. The difference lay not in the law itself, but in the interpretation and the will of those enforcing it. In the background, the guard continued his routine. Footsteps echoed on polished floors, careful and deliberate. He observed not only the child's care but also the shifting patterns of authority, noting subtleties, which doors opened freely, which corridors remained under watch, which decisions were deferred too long. The palace itself was alive with layers of history and hierarchy, each layer capable of shielding or exposing. Charlotte, quietly resilient, began to engage more fully with her environment. She tested boundaries gently, asking small questions, seeking minimal but consistent attention. Her responses to caretakers, measured yet perceptive, revealed her growing awareness of the institutional structures around her. Even in play, she noted absences, inconsistencies, and the unspoken rules that governed her life. Prince William watched it all with precision. The palace, once a place where order masked neglect, had become a laboratory of accountability. Yet he understood the fragility of change. Culture was not rewritten by decree alone. Loyalty could still be misdirected. Obedience could still be weaponized. And somewhere in the shadows, habits of concealment persisted, waiting for opportunity. Late one evening, a sealed file was unearthed. Another set of reports, older still, containing notes about procedures that had quietly failed decades earlier. No child was named, no accusation explicit, yet the patterns were unmistakable. Charlotte's experience was not isolated. It was a symptom of systemic silence that had been tolerated by precedent. The room where the file was open was silent, yet the weight of the past pressed heavily. Prince William examined each line carefully, understanding that confronting history was as necessary as safeguarding the present. Protocol, he realized, was not just a tool for protection. It could be a weapon wielded unconsciously or deliberately to hide the very harm it was meant to prevent. The guard returned the next day to his patrol, notes in hand. The palace had begun adjusting. Subtly, logs were monitored more frequently. Access schedules were tightened. Surveillance redundancies implemented. And yet, even as the machinery adapted, he knew instinctively that vigilance was no longer optional. Systems alone could never replace conscience. Charlotte, for the first time in months, laughed freely in her private wing, a sound unaccompanied by tension, hesitation, or observation. It was a small victory, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but it carried immense weight. In the palace's shadows, the human element remained the truest safeguard. As the sun dipped behind London rooftops, William moved through the corridors alone. He traced the paths once hidden by routine, observing spaces where silence had prevailed, spaces where now light lingered. He understood the lesson. Even a palace built on centuries of tradition could fail if those within it chose comfort over conscience. And yet, the work was far from over. The past could never be fully erased. Hidden protocols, long forgotten, waited quietly for discovery. And Charlotte, resilient but observant, would continue to notice what adults sometimes overlooked. The palace was awake, but unease lingered in corners where light rarely reached. Kensington, pristine and polished, now carried traces of recent upheaval. Corridors still gleamed, staff moved with rehearsed precision, yet behind the calm, questions simmered. The dismissal of the senior household staff had sent ripples through centuries of hierarchy. Loyalty, once unquestioned, was now measured against a higher standard. Conscience. The guard moved through familiar corridors, observing the subtle shifts. Some staff approached him with cautious respect. Others avoided eye contact, their allegiance conflicted, recalibrating to the new order. Every decision he made, every note he filed, now carried the awareness that morality had become authority. Prince William convened a small meeting in a private room. Only the most trusted advisors were present. Their expressions were composed, but tension hovered in the air like a low hum. Discussions were not about ceremony, not about tradition. They were about duty, the duty to protect, to intervene, to act when systems failed. Questions were raised quietly. How far does loyalty extend when it conflicts with child's welfare? When must a servant defy orders? When must a royal override the institution itself? The answers were neither simple nor comfortable. The guard, summoned to present his observations, placed evidence on the table. Detailed logs, time-stamped gaps, and a handwritten note from Charlotte. William examined each carefully, aware that these small fragments told a story of systemic neglect. Loyalty to rank had almost blinded the palace to its moral obligation. Discussion turned to internal conflict. Some staff hesitated to challenge decisions, fearing reprisal or career damage. Others had already acted, quietly mitigating harm where they could. The palace's strength had always been in hierarchy, yet now the hierarchy revealed a dangerous flaw. Obedience could mask wrongdoing, conceal mistakes, and endanger those it was meant to protect. Charlotte remained mostly unseen during the deliberations, but her presence was felt. Her needs guided every action. Her safety reframed what loyalty truly meant. Staff and guards alike learned that duty was no longer synonymous with deference. To serve the crown now required courage, insight, and moral clarity. As evening fell, William walked the corridors alone. The palace was calm again, but its silence no longer carried complacency. The echoes were different now. They carried awareness, vigilance, and the subtle hum of accountability. He paused outside Charlotte's wing, listening. The faint sounds of her safe, measured movements reassured him. The palace, in all its history and authority, had chosen, finally, to place a child above tradition. And yet, he knew the lesson was ongoing. Every decision, every shift in power, every act of obedience now carried weight. Loyalty could no longer exist in isolation. It collided with duty, and duty would always win. Ending transition. As night settled over Kensington, one truth hung quietly in the halls. Even within the most disciplined institution, moral courage will always test the boundaries of loyalty.